automatic transmission test 5 is the first one we're going to do. And so we're going to say some friction discs are steel on both sides and some have no friction material.
True.
That's true. Now you guys have, when you guys have seen, when I'm talking about friction discs, the ones of you guys that have already torn transmissions apart over there, you know what I'm talking about when I say friction discs, right?
Yep.
Okay, and Bobby, yesterday you said something about, that reminded you of something you'd seen somewhere else. These clutches and steels. You told me like a motorcycle, remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because then it's a cable operated, right? Okay, so there you go. And also there's something similar like in limited slip differentials. There's some little clutches in there on either side like that. They're upright, I mean, they're held with a spring all the time. A bushing is a type of bearing. So what is a bearing? Why do they call it a bearing?
Because it allows
in certain directions.
What about because it bears a load? Yeah, it does. It bears a load. There's a load there. You got it? Okay, if you got two things that are moving, and you basically need something to separate those, you know, two components that are reacting one within the other. Yeah. The clutch is operated by mechanical pressure when you were talking about. This is automatic transmission now. No, it's actually by hydraulic pressure. Right? So you're going to have fluid in there. As the guy that was the shop foreman at the dealership where I worked for so long said that when he first went years ago to Ford school way back a long time ago, and he went to school on one particular transmission. It was a C4 or a C5, whichever one of those. And he said that when he tore it apart, he asked the instructor, he says, why is it I'm having to replace the direct clutches on so many police cars? They're all burning out, and I'm having to replace a bunch of them. The guy said, how many have you done? He goes, probably 100. And the guy said, well, we'll talk about that later. And so he got all of this stuff on the table all torn apart, and they put the transmission back together and the valve body and all that kind of thing. And he had a part left over. And the instructor says, why do you have a part left over? And he goes, that doesn't go in this transmission. And the guy said, where does it go? He says, it goes in a C6, like the police cars I've done 100 of. I know what this is. And that guy says, okay. Then he respected the guy, and he started talking to him. And he says, and the centrifugal force is keeping that fluid in there so that it can't drain out of that drum, and it's keeping the clutches applied where they're not supposed to be. It's going in 2 gears, it's burning the clutches out. So you can take a drill and drill a little tiny hole in there so that that fluid will have somewhere to go. It won't keep it from applying, won't hurt a thing, but it'll give it somewhere to go. And he says, and that fixed those things, you know. So anyway, that's just a funny little story there. A roller clutch is a 2-way clutch. I showed you one over there earlier. Remember that? What's another name for it? I mean, that we like to call it, but it's not really. You know the thing that's got the little bow ties? And all the way around the sprag, it goes one way and not the other. You know, it's a one-way clutch. You can turn it one way, but when you start to go the other way, it stops. Where is one place that a one-way clutch is that you don't ever think about unless somebody like me asks you the question? What about a starter drive? You ever notice the gear on a starter whenever you can turn it one way but you can't turn it the other way? Yeah. Inside that little housing underneath that thing is a roller clutch. And it's basically, those rollers, it's got some ramps. And those rollers, when you turn it one way, those rollers roll down into the deep part of that ramp. When you turn it the other way, they roll up the ramp and they lock up. And that's how that one-way clutch, that's how one-way clutch works. But in the transmission, it's got a lot more rollers. Now here's something else, word to the wise, pay attention. 4T60E transmissions, like what's in that Oldsmobile out there, if you got that thing up on the lift and you drive it on the lift too fast, you know those little springs that push against those rollers are little accordion looking things, and they've got a certain amount of temper in them to hold those rollers. If you drive that thing too fast on the lift, you can damage that roller clutch by taking the temper out of those springs. And the way that that manifests itself is you'll be sitting there and the car will be idling. It won't even be in gear. And you may have your knee against the tire and you can feel it trying to grab and go every now and then. And that roller clutch is all the way in the bottom of that transmission. And you got to tear it all the way down to get to it. Then that happens if you drive it too fast on the lift. And that's the 4T60E front wheel drive. Be careful how fast you drive a vehicle on the lift, because you can cause things to happen that you didn't intend to happen. You know what I mean? It's just like I was telling you guys last semester, if you're cleaning an electronic throttle body, don't push that blade open with your finger, because if you do, you can damage that throttle body and you may have to buy one. The right way to do it is get your buddy to hold his foot on the floor, key on, engine not running, hold a foot down, let the throttle blade open. Anyway, there's all kinds of just little stuff that you just really don't need to do. You know what I mean? Like when he's got to drill that stud out, I was telling him, if you spin a drill bit too fast when you're drilling a bolt out, then the drill bit and the bolt both get hot, and then it gets to where nothing's cutting anymore. Spin it slow, lubricate it. You know about that, didn't you, Quincy? Where'd you run into that at? No, okay. All right then. Piston return spring must be removed before the piston can be serviced. You got to push that thing down, take the snap ring off the middle, let it come out. If you've seen those clutch packs, you know, on those transmissions, you'll know what that's talking about. But this friend of mine that I worked with back in the '77, I was working for a while at a shop at Enterprise. And this guy could take one of those 350 turbo hydromatics out and rebuild it so fast that the torque converter was still hot when he got ready to put it back in the car. Well, the funny thing about it was, I would see him leaving some of those. They'd have a whole line of springs around there that was return springs that were supposed to push the clutch back down when the hydraulic pressure went away. He'd leave about half of those off of there sometimes, or maybe every third one. You know, and I didn't know anything about automatic transmissions back then. I said, Mike, why are you leaving those springs off? Isn't it important? He goes, well, they'll give it a firmer shift. And he says, this guy wants a little bit firmer shift, so I'm just leaving these springs off. I mean, he wasn't even putting a shift kit in it. He just leaves some of the springs off of it. You know, they don't all have multiple springs like that, but if they do, you know, if you're that sharp on automatic transmissions, you can do little tricks.
Did we skip number 5?
Number 5 is a worn or warped drum service can be visually inspected. Yes, you can visually inspect it, but you may not see the problem. And so that's false. That's supposed to be the right answer. That's supposed to be false. You can visually inspect it. You can visually inspect anything. I can visually inspect the top of your head, but I may not know if there's anything wrong with it or not. You see where I'm going with that? That's the long and short of it. That's a poorly written question. The clutch pack cannot be modified. That's false. Some clutches use single-sided friction discs. That's true, but it's rare, okay? The clutch is housed in the transmission or transaxle case. All right, now you got to remember this. You've got the plates. You guys, when you were pulling these transmissions apart, did you notice the steel plates have got teeth on the outside and the fiber plates have got teeth on the inside? Mm-hmm. When you stack all those together, the inner and the outer components can turn separately unless that clutch is applied. Then they become one, right? Okay, so what are they reacting with? Like some of them, the ones that go into the case, have you seen some of them that went into the case? They actually had some where the outer teeth on them steel rings meshed with little places in the case. That's actually a brake. It does the same job as a band. You see, it's actually, if it's hooked into the case, what's going to happen when that clutch pack applies? Whatever is spinning in the middle is going to become a part of the case, and it's going to stop turning. Well, it's connected to the planetary gear set, right? How many particular parts of the planetary gear set can be held or driven?
Held or driven?
Yeah. Every part of the planetary gear set can be held or driven. So how many components are there to the planetary gear set as far as what can be held or driven?
4 or 3.
3, exactly. So you've got, what are they? What are the different parts of the planetary gear set? Don't sit there with your deer in the headlights look and saying, I just want to sit here and let somebody else give me the answer because I don't really care what it is. I just want to be through with this and get out of here. We're not going to play that game, right?
The planetary gear and the outer ring.
Exactly. You got the carrier, the planet carrier, which is where the little small gears are. The sun gear is in the middle. Remember that because the sun's in the middle of the solar system. And then you got the ring gear. Those are any one of those components on a standard planetary gear setup. Any one of those can be either held or driven. Okay, so basically, that's how you're going to get your different ranges, and that's what these clutch packs are doing, right? And remember, these things have got rubber seals and stuff in them that have to be replaced. Just rattling it back together so it looks right mechanically ain't no good if it's not able to hold fluid pressure. There is a sheet that I want to give it out about tearing that thing apart. You're supposed to air test those clutches. Figure out, get down in there with some air and shoot it in there and listen to them apply and that kind of stuff. If they apply, that's good. Now we actually have a valve body plate that you can get for these things. Look over there behind that door. See that aluminum plate with the holes drilled in it? Should have bring me that. That plate right there is actually, if we have a problem with our transmission while it's in the car, we've done our pressure test, and we're thinking that we may have an intermediate clutch pack or something that's got a compromised seal or something in it, and we're going to put this, we're going to take the valve body off, and we're going to bolt this up. This one here fits the 4T60E. We're going to bolt this to where the valve body goes, and then this is basically telling us input clutch, third clutch, fourth clutch, an accumulator, torque converter clutch. We shoot air pressure in these holes, and we listen to what happens. If it goes thump, 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 and then one of them goes shh, aha, that's where our pressures get lost. Then when we tear that transmission apart, we know that we need to pay particular attention to that one that was hissing. You hear me? That's how you gather data. A lot of times, whenever we're just learning how to fix stuff, we just like to fly in there and rip stuff apart and hope we see something. Well, if you gather the data first, pressure test, you know, look and see which solenoids are operating when that thing's in that particular gear that's not working right. Look and see which clutches and bands are applied. Pull the valve body, do the pressure test. See what I'm saying? You do your pressure test. If you don't hear anything leaking, you're going to look for stuck valves in the valve body. It's really a totally different world. An automatic transmission stuff is either love it or hate it. And I'm going to pass this around and let you look at it. So, and I will be back here in a minute. Clutch is housed in the transmission or transaxle case. That's true. Plate clearance or piston travel measurements must be made after installing the clutch assembly. That is actually false. You're supposed to do it as soon as you build the clutch assembly on the bench. You're technically supposed to check for plate clearance or piston travel. The best transmission mechanics that I know can look at that thing and tell without having to get a feeler gauge after it. If you don't have enough clutches, and you know, different transmissions have different numbers of depending on the torque rating, have got different numbers of clutches, of steels and fibers. You know what I mean? Like some of them may only have a few, and they got the tolerance taken up with the thickness of the piston or something like that. So basically, if you're going to stack all them things together, if it had 5 clutches and 5 steels last time, you need to put 5 clutches and 5 steels this time. And if you made a mistake and didn't put enough, and there's too much clearance, you got to go back and revisit that. Now, has anybody ever heard of something called a tolerance stack up? When you're putting a lot of stuff together, and every part you put together is within tolerance, but it's maybe on the top side of that tolerance, like if it's almost too loose but it's within tolerance, and you keep stacking components together and each one of them is almost too loose but it's in tolerance, by the time you get to the top, everything's too loose. Because it's all, they got a tolerance stack up. That's what a tolerance stack up is. Which is, let's go down here, which is not an applied component used in typical automatic transmission or transaxle. Anybody know? What about a two-way clutch? A two-way clutch is not an applied component. You do have multiple disc clutches, you got one-way clutches, and you got clutch bands. A two-way clutch doesn't even make any sense. That's like if we were studying emissions, if I asked you about, like the other day I asked somebody, did you check the heated hydrocarbon vent? And they said, huh? Remember that? All right. The seal, what seal is lateral, is commonly used to seal the piston to the drum bore. That's going to be a C there. It's a D-ring. Okay, which of the following is not a type of clutch band? Triple wrap heavy duty. Yeah. All right, which of the following is not a servo link? Now you can look in your book that I gave you and see, and that you've gotten, see this stuff, pictures of it and everything, so don't neglect to do that. Number 14, which of the following is not a servo linkage design? And what's a servo do? Anybody know? What if you're hearing about a servo, what are you thinking? What do you think when you hear servo? Huh?
A mechanical arm type thing.
Sort of, but a servo is basically, imagine that I want to apply a band, and I'm basically going to anchor that band on one end, and the other end I'm going to have to move it to apply it, sort of like brakes, right? Okay, so I'm going to have a piston and a bore in the case, and I'm going to have a little mechanical hookup to that band, and I'm going to put fluid in there, and it's going to push that piston with a sealing ring on it, and it's going to apply that band. So the servo is basically a hydraulic piston, kind of like a wheel cylinder or a disc caliper. So technically you could say that a disc caliper or a wheel cylinder is a servo. If fluid pressure goes in there, it causes things to happen. But that's in a transmission. There, if you look down in there, you know those things that you guys took out, those little things that went in those big bores when after you pull the valve body off. Now, you know, sometimes you'll just have a piston with a seal on it that's got a spring under it, and it doesn't seem to hook to anything. You know what that is? That's an accumulator. Because when pressure goes up in there, it has to squeeze that spring before it applies the clutch, and it softens the application of the clutch so that it's not so hard. You hear? That's why a shift kit will a lot of times have weaker springs for those accumulators so that it'll apply a little firmer. You see where I'm going with that? Okay, understand this. Now, if you've got this thing in a bore and it's got a lever coming off going to a band, that's a servo. Anything that does something like it's a servo. So you need to be able to discuss this intelligently, because if not, you'll be a buffoon. Okay. Now, let's see. Which of the following is not a servo linkage design? That's number 14. That would be a curved link. You got a cantilever, you got a straight link, and you got a lever. What's a cantilever? Anybody know what a cantilever is?
One side.
Yeah. Basically, it's a lever that can't move. Right? You know what I mean? It's sort of like for some reason, like a rafter. See what I'm saying? Like it's basically you got this sticking out where you got this thing hanging off the end of it under the fulcrum. It can't move, but it's a cantilever kind of thing. That's the way I always describe that. But you can look that up and see if I'm wrong. And I would encourage you to. Clutch steel plate has slots cut into the surface. What's it called? A clutch steel plate that has slots cut into the surface is called what? You're going to love this. It looks like, that sounds like a made-up name. What do you think? It's a turbulator plate. Are turbulator plates good? Are they our friend? Okay, is that the end of your test? It is, isn't it?
Yes.
All right, we're going to stop on that one right now, but I'm going to show you some pictures. Let me